Senator McKenzie.
Thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy President. The hypocrisy, the level of debt that was left and the assumptions underpinning those that have spoken from the other side on this particular MPI is breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. The assumption is that we at this side do not appreciate public broadcasters, do not appreciate the substantial contribution that a public broadcaster has made over 80 years to our national identity and indeed serving particularly rural and regional communities where others have not been before. Let us know what the weather's going to be so we know when to put the crop in. Let us know the community events, how national agenda will play out at the local level. To make the assumption that we don't appreciate that in our local communities is absolute joke. There is lots of community concern about the reforms to the ABC and the SBS. It means difficult decisions, Senator Ludlam, and these are difficult decisions that you were never prepared to make. Never prepared to make. You're happy for Indigenous programs to have an efficiency dividend. You are happy for education departments to have a dividend. You are happy for defence departments to have a dividend, but you are not happy for ABC and SBS to have to be like everybody else across the whole of government and actually be subject to contributing to pay down the absolute mess that you left us. Change is never easy, but it's almost always necessary. The taxpayer spends more than $1 billion a year on the ABC, and the taxpayer is entitled to demand value for money. However, people are less concerned about the dollar amount given to the ABC and far more interested in the level of service that it provides to them and their local community. The Government and Communications Minister Malcolm Turnbull have repeatedly stated they remain committed to maintaining the health and vibrancy of the ABC and SBS. But it must be financially sustainable. It must be financially sustainable. These are choices. And Mr Scott made that point in estimates last Thursday. It is about prioritisation. It is about choices, where to actually fulfil their charter obligations in the most efficient manner. For the people and the Nationals represent, that means the health and vibrancy of services to people living in regional Australia, principally the ABC, local radio and vitally emergency broadcasting services, which I note in Senate estimates on Thursday, Minister Scott was quite flippantly about to say, well, Senator, when I questioned him on this, we can't actually rule in, rule out, we'll wait till Monday when I make the announcement. Well, the fact was that was generating very real fear, particularly in regional Victoria, around the provision of emergency services program. He then very, very quickly decided that that was all in the basket. So I don't actually make any apology for putting all my efforts into ensuring ABC management and the board maintains its regional footprint. And I'm buoyed by Mr Scott's public declarations of a regional focus, because it is about prioritisation as a national broadcaster. As a former member of the Senate Environment and Communications Legislation Committee, I've had the privilege of being able to question ABC management in Senate estimates over a number of years. ABC Managing Director Mark Scott has repeatedly assured me that the ABC's role as an emergency broadcaster is not under review, but I think his other answers over a period of time have been less reassuring about his commitment to regional Australia, which is why I'm buoyed by his statement today. He didn't seem to have a lot of information on hand about local radio in regional Australia and at what costs. In May estimates, I asked Mr Scott how many of the ABC's 4,500 employees worked in regional offices. He couldn't tell me. Apparently it's 501. In estimates last week, I asked Mr Scott how much of the ABC budget goes to local radio. Western Victoria, Central Vic, Bendigo, Ballarat, etc. Mr Scott said he'd have to check that. I'd have to check that. And then I said, well, let's look at trends. Has the amount you've actually invested of the $1 billion Australians give to you as the national broadcaster, have you actually increased your investment over time into local radio? And the answer I got was no, I think the amounts have actually remained static. So they haven't actually been investing in the areas that count as a national broadcaster. Rather, they've been doing exactly what Senator Ludlam said. And they've been centralising to Sydney with over half, and that's exactly what Mr Scott said. In a drive for efficiency, they've been centralising. And where have they been centralising? To Adelaide, to Tasmania, to Perth, to regional Australia? No. They've been centralising to Sydney. And today was a classic case of the options were available. The options were available, in fact, they were even laid out for them, where they could find efficiency measures, but it went to Sydney, and they don't want to do that. They don't want to do that. He also went to talking about local radio stations in regional areas. I asked him about staffing costs because the footprint gets bigger. We collapse local radio into each other. Why we actually needed to do that. He couldn't tell me why, because the ABC doesn't actually keep central records of staffing areas. So it's a little hard to actually look at your business, make serious decisions about efficiencies in the business if you don't actually record the details of how you're doing business. So I think there's a way to go on that. The vagueness is deeply worrying and gives the impression of a lack of transparency and about how the resource allocation by the taxpayer marries with the charter obligations of the ABC and in its role as the national broadcaster. As Minister Turnbull said in his headland speech, we need more granular detail on where the ABC is spending its money and how it relates to the charter obligations. The best cure for suspicion is sunlight, the Minister said, and I couldn't agree more. Without that sunlight, we're left believing ABC management sees regional broadcasting as an annoying distraction to the more exciting areas of prime TV and current affairs, and competing in city markets with yet another fabulous brekkie program. But it's not good enough. The ABC Charter is to be a national broadcaster, not just another Sydney or Melbourne network. Government, as I said, had identified through the efficiency review a variety of options. The back office or support services function could generate $40 million and make 150 less staff potentially redundant. That wasn't an option taken. Savings to changing the way broadcasters negotiate the transmission contracts, $30 million over 10 years. Savings from selling properties, like the building that is a car park, not core production facilities, a car park and a costume storage in, North Sydney, worth around $20 million. And I think there may be another $40 million available in implementation costs, which is why there's a savings program spread over 5 years with zero money actually required in year one. It's also worth noting the ABC has 45 senior presenters and managers on earning more than $200,000 a year, which is actually more than 10% of their total staff. The government is confident that there's money available without impacting on programming to meet implementation costs, and that the long-term gains from modernising the business far outweigh any one-off implementation costs. I note that today the Managing Director of the ABC did announce that 5 regional radio stations would be closing, one in my home state in Morwell. And I just want to go to some press about that, where a regional ABC source said management's decision to shut down the Morwell studio was, and I quote, a big mistake that showed little understanding of how many major news stories are generated in the Latrobe Valley during the past year alone. And I'm thinking particularly of the fire in one of our coal mines. Clearly, this decision was made in Sydney, the source told Fairfax Media. It doesn't make any sense for Gippsland. It's where most of the news come from. The power stations are there, and what happens there, what if there's another mine fire? Two cities, Sydney-centric seems to be the recurring theme, and I couldn't agree more. Considering Mr Scott says savings are coming from back office, there should be no redundancies in regional Australia, since ABC workers in regional Australia are all on the front line. It's worth noting the comments of ABC Chairman James Spiegelman as he endorsed his Managing Director's plans. The initiatives outlined by Mr Scott comprise a carefully considered response to the twin challenges of technological change and reduced funding. We will keep a sharp eye on Mr Scott's plan for the ABC. It would not have been easy for him to actually look at the business and work out which areas he was going to prioritise to find efficiencies in, and I hope he's chosen to balance competing issues accordingly. I think whether it's local weather report, local issues, emergency broadcasting announcements or community events, ABC Radio has played a core role in country communities for over 82 years and shouldn't be cut by the board or the Managing Director, and would seek them to appreciate the important role the ABC plays in our environmental, economic and social wellbeing, but we absolutely support the government's role in getting the budget under control.
Thank you, Senator McKenzie.